Hi, we are Hazel and Luke Robertson, and we are explorers in residence for the Royal Scottish Geographical Society. We're also Arctic guides for the Polar Academy, and we run our own business, Everyday Impact, an international coaching and training business. And today we are bringing our talk, Reflections on Ice. So really, what is it thinking about these wild places, these wild, remote, cold places that both of us are drawn to? Like, what is it that draws us there? And I think reflecting on it, it's this, almost endless horizon, just the sky and the ice. It's knowing that we have everything with us that we need to survive, and just tuning in to the nature and to the landscape as well. So feeling that snow squeaking under our skis and just breathing in the kind of cold mountain crisp air as well. That's what really draws us there. And throughout this talk, we're just going to cover a little bit about our experiences in some of these wild places and really what they have taught us. But coming back a little bit, where did this love of these remote places that both of us share really come from? So we had our first joint expedition really at the age of 13. We had this amazing geography teacher. So we went to the same high school in Stonehaven, and our geography teacher planned these amazing trips in the summer holidays. So we went to Iceland, we went to Switzerland, and this picture here was us in Switzerland, both learning about these vast landscapes that the geography teacher was just making more and more real. And this was building on our own experiences of growing up. Luke grew up on a farm, and then his family moved to France, so he had these kind of adventurous experiences from a young age. And myself, I lived in Alaska and Canada for a bit of it. So this really instilled both of us this love of the outdoors that was like more solidified throughout school as well. And it took a little bit longer. We were in the same friendship group. It took a little bit longer before we actually ended up married. But our friendship started at the age of 13.
So as well as these school trips, I became really interested and read so much of the Famous Five and the Secret Seven novels from Enid Blyton. And on the farm, I would take myself away and make dens and get so excited about these kids, these from the Famous Five and Secret Seven, going on these adventures. And at that point, those types of adventures felt way more relatable to me than any kind of polar expedition, really. But as I got older and started going on these school trips, my mind and my imagination started to grow, and eventually I came across the polar explorers of the early 20th century, so Scott and Shackleton and Nansen and those types of figures. And when I read about Antarctica, it just felt like this other world that I struggled to kind of almost imagine. But I did think to myself, wouldn't it be amazing someday to go there and go on some big adventure or some big expedition? And I think sometimes in our lives it can be so easy to think, I'll do that someday, or in the future at some point I'll maybe go and do what I want to do. And that certainly was the case for me for a while. I thought at some point in the future I'll go away and do this. But then really something happened that made me realize that someday really needed to be sooner rather than later. And sometimes someday never actually happens. So when I was 23 years old, I was diagnosed with a heart condition, and I had to have an artificial pacemaker fitted. And it came as a really big shock at the time. But it also made me think that life is really about a series of moments, and the choices we make in those moments are what determine our future. And so at the early stages, absolutely, I was pretty scared about getting a pacemaker when I started looking at the life expectancy of someone that has one, and anyone mentions the heart, you're kind of like, I don't really want to think about that too much. But after having that initial fear and kind of coming through the operation, I started to think for the first time in my life quite intentionally. And I started to understand that if I always thought about how kind of scared this was, about all the downsides to having a pacemaker, then I wouldn't actually be moving forward in my life. And I thought I need to think of this situation and what's happened to me in a different way. I need to focus on what I can control. The pacemaker has happened, the operation's happened. I needed it to stay alive in a way. And so I needed to think and control what I could, my outlook, my approach, and really what I wanted to do with my life. And I was about to go training to 2 trips, one to Norway and one to Greenland, to prepare for this Antarctic expedition that I'd been in the planning for a few years. And I was told after a CT scan that I had a rather large brain tumour that you can see in the white mass in this photo, this slide here. And I had to try and use the pacemaker experience, and I drew on that experience and learned a lot from it in terms of what I could control in this situation. Again, the operation needed to happen. It needed to happen to keep me alive. But I had a choice about how I could think about this in the moment and afterwards. And as I lay in the ward bed in the Edinburgh hospital, and I could see the Pentland Hills to the south of the city, and I imagined that same sun that was setting behind those hills, guiding me to the South Pole. And this helped me so much before the operation and all the worries that are carried there. And I woke up from this operation to be told, in fact, it wasn't a brain tumour. It was, in fact, a very rare enterogenous cyst that had been growing in my head. And it's still there to this day, but it meant I got out of hospital so much quicker than I could have ever imagined before. But really, this experience of being in hospital and meeting patients who became friends, and the experience of having a pacemaker fitted at a young age, really made the trip to Antarctica feel all that more purposeful. I wanted to inspire other people who were going through their own difficulties to really realise that they were capable of so much more and come through those difficult times and do things that they, at some point, could have only dreamed could actually happen.
So after Luke had recovered from the brain surgery, when we were planning his solo expedition to Antarctica, one thing that was still on the list that we needed to figure out was insurance.
Yeah, so I phoned Travelex, the well-known insurance provider, and told them my plan to ski to the South Pole. And so this is a map of Antarctica. You can see the British Isles to scale there. And Antarctica is the windiest, driest, and highest continent on the planet. And I aim to ski from the coast at Hercules Inlet, pretty much in a straight line all the way to the South Pole. And so I explained this on the call to Travelex, and the woman said, "Yeah, Mr. Robertson, this sounds all fine. We're sure we can have you covered." I asked how much would it be, something we were a bit worried about with all my medical conditions.
Yeah, we were bracing ourselves, just like waiting.
How many zeros at the end of this number? £200 for 3 months full coverage in Antarctica. I could hardly believe our ears. We were kind of like high-fiving each other in person. And then she said, "Yeah, Mr. Robertson, a couple £100, that's all it is." And I said, "Okay, perfect, let's go ahead." And there I was, very confident I had this insurance covered, until she said, "Mr. Robertson, would you like to hire a car on your holiday to Antarctica?" Now, this is in fact the busiest road you have in Antarctica. So to this day, I'm not actually sure how much insurance coverage I did have, but it seemed to do the trick. But everything about this expedition was teamwork. I had a logistics team, comms team, and a PR team. It just happened to all be Hazel. Hazel even came all the way to Chile, to Punta Arenas, southernmost tip of South America, to help me with all the logistics and all the final planning.
And so I had in my mind, I was like, "Ooh, this, South American adventure, we're going to Patagonia, like so I'd always wanted to go." And actually the reality was spending over a week in this warehouse sorting through all of Luke's kit, like everything he would need for 40 days on the ice. And you can see in the background, there's all the pulk stacked up. This is a big warehouse used by the logistics team. And that's Luke there double poling his tent, to make it really strong against the Antarctic winds. So here is another shot of us organising all of Luke's kit, and one of the jobs that I had for 2 whole days, I was sorting out all the food. So taking everything out of the bags that they would normally be in, where that would add extra weight, decanting everything into a Ziploc bag, adding in other food that I'd been weighing out, and like loads of stacks of chocolate as well. And I was thinking, okay, what can I do that's maybe something like a little boost to give Luke when he's kind of out in the ice on his own, it's a lonely eating dinner out there, I imagine. So I wrote little notes, just putting little like messages and little things to kind of lift his spirits. And we had 45 bags that I'd created. So 40 of them were for during the day, every day. He'd just grab a bag so he doesn't have to think about it when he's in his tent preparing food. Grab a bag from the pulk, we're good to go. And then the 5 bags, they were like emergency bags. So that was, okay, if you're opening this, maybe things have taken a bit longer, this is some extra food towards the end of the trip, like in case of emergency, break and open. So I put some like special little notes in those emergency rations that were probably not going to be tucked into.
But in reality, the weather at the start of the trip was much more fierce than I'd hoped for. And in the uphill section at the start as well, my pulk was at its heaviest as I climbed from the coast. And I was just so exhausted, so tired. And I started digging into these extra rations, these extra 5 days, slightly earlier than anticipated. So these messages such as, you're almost there, keep going, not long to go now, when Hazel thought I might have been digging into them with maybe 50 miles to go, I was actually getting those messages hundreds and hundreds of miles from the end. So probably not the effect you'd anticipated, but still really lovely nonetheless. When I was dropped off at the coast of Antarctica, I remember thinking, can I actually do this? And as the small plane disappeared, there was just pure silence. People had raised over £35,000 before I'd even set foot on the ice. And I wondered, could I actually repay all that faith and all that funds for charity as well? I was so determined, but I wondered whether I could actually do it. And in fact, I realised quite quickly that the health challenges and that mindset shift that happened through those experiences was actually just the best possible training for a solo expedition to the South Pole. These health challenges had taught me to think of obstacles really in a completely different way. It's what you make them mean in your life and what you take from them and move forward. And it was something I definitely needed at many, many points on this expedition.
So while this was all going on and Luke was being dropped off at the start, so I was back home and I was the main point of contact. So, although I was worrying a little bit about Luke, I did trust him and I knew that, he'd done all this training and that he was in the best position that he could be in. So I trusted that he would be okay. But as this main point of contact, I had to have my phone on loud at all the times, so 24 hours. I had to be in signal for 24 hours as well, a day, for the whole time that he was away. And I remember driving up this glen. I was going to go for a trail run, clear my head with everything that was going on. And I noticed that the 3G dropped to nothing. And in that moment, I was like, I can't be out of signal. I need to turn around and actually be there, because if he phones now, he's not going to have anyone to chat to. So I turned around and just went for a local trail run as well. So it was very kind of different 6 weeks while he was away. But he had a tracker. I followed it every whenever it updated, every half an hour, I think. It was like, a new point, how far has he gone? Doing all the calculations in my head of okay, how far has he still got to go? Is he on track? And then every night he would check in with the base. So there was the logistics base on Antarctica and he had to check in every single night with the position. And he would also check in with me and just give me a quick chat, quick call, we'd have a quick chat and that was fine. But 2 weeks into the expedition, so I'd got into this routine of the nightly call from Luke and the check-in. I got this call at a slightly different time and I pulled over, I was driving at the time and he was like, my batteries are not charging anymore. And I was like, okay, what does this mean? And essentially the solar panel that he'd been using to recharge all his batteries had failed. And so therefore all of his sat phone, all of his tracking device, everything that he only had the batteries that were existing in it and a couple of spares for the next 4 weeks, for the whole of the rest of the trip. And from that moment on, I was getting no calls, there was no tracker, until it ran out, no tracker, no calls, except in emergencies. So it was almost this silence, and I was just getting this nightly position from the logistics team who would email it back to me. So it went from having this communication and checking in on him, making sure he was okay, to absolutely nothing.
And I think it was tough on me to a certain extent, but it must have been so tough on Hazel. And the logistics team in Antarctica that were back at base camp, they offered me essentially a tech drop. So at the halfway point, they'd actually buried satellite phones and batteries that would have meant, I could have contacted base camp without any problem. I could have spoken to Hazel, but it would have meant the whole expedition would have been supported instead of unsupported. So my goal was to ski solo and unsupported, so no outside help. And it was quite a big decision, but I stuck to it. And I remember the moment I skied past that tech drop, and I remember thinking, well, this is kind of now or never. And then I was fully committed for the second half of the trip. And I set off wanting to follow in the footsteps of those polar explorers who had no communication back home. News took months to get back home, and I didn't quite expect to follow in their footsteps in that way as well. And it just added this other layer of complexity to the whole expedition, and a bit of worry as well. But at the same time, I could see myself starting to get quite worried about this. Again, quite anxious, especially when it happened, thinking, is this trip over now? Is it actually, can I go another 25 days without any charging equipment? What if the batteries run out? What if I'm taken ill? And I could see very quickly that if I used up all my mental energy on that, then I wouldn't make the progress I actually needed to get to the South Pole. So again, I was just trying to use that mindset shift. Was what I was thinking helpful in that situation? Would it keep getting me out of the tent each morning? Or was it actually going to keep me stuck in worry? So I changed that mindset very quickly. Although it was always in the side or always in the back of my mind to think about getting outside of the tent, staying healthy, keeping the right diet and trying to manage that side of things, essentially what I could control. But having no tech drop was tough, and especially as it came just before Christmas Day. So instead, I gave myself a little boost and changed into my only clean pair of underwear on Christmas Day. It was one of the best Christmases ever.
A white Christmas.
Very white Christmas, yeah.
And because there were no comms between Luke and I, so he still had to check in with the base camp, or else if they didn't hear from him within 2 days, they would just send a plane and from his last known position and pick him up, and that would be expedition over. So he had to save all his battery for checking in with them. So I had no idea what Luke was doing. I was just getting this nightly position from the logistics team, and so I was doing all the social media updates, kind of just guessing. I had a bit of a distance of where he'd gone. I knew the weather, but was just not making things up, but colouring the story, because actually I didn't really know how Luke was doing. I just knew that he was continuing to make progress.
Well, all I had to do was ski, eat, sleep, repeat. Makes it sound a lot more difficult, a lot easier.
And I learned a very important lesson doing these updates onto social media, which is social media, of course, is in the public domain, and anyone can access the stuff. And a comment I made actually ended up in a newspaper. So the largest land animal, not mammal, the largest land animal in Antarctica is the Antarctic midge. So I thought, well, that's quite funny because there's this connection with obviously like the Scottish thing. So I made a joke. Luke was, he had all this wind that he was battling, but at least it was like keeping these midges at bay. And it ended up in a national newspaper. So here it is here. Last night she revealed, that was me, Luke is making incredible progress and has climbed to 2,500 meters. He's facing headwinds, but at least they keep the Antarctic midge at bay. So don't believe everything that you read in the media. And that was a very important lesson for me of, people are actually watching and following this trip as well.
So skiing past the tech drop-off, continued on this journey to the South Pole, and eventually climbing higher and higher up onto the polar plateau, which is about 100 miles from the pole. And at this point, I was so short on food and so short on fuel and starting to get short on energy as well. And I really felt as if kind of like the whole rest of the expedition had led up to this moment, and these last few days, just when everything needed to come together and I needed to complete the trip. And during this time, I knew I just about had enough battery left in my sat phone to call logistics and to call Hazel. And so I used up a part of this battery to call her up and tell her about an amazing dream that I had. that?
Yeah, so I remember I think I was like heading to work, or I can't remember exactly, but I got this call from Luke. So it was a bit of a surprise because I'd not really heard from him at all over the last like 4 weeks. Just the occasional call at 3 a.m. UK time. But anyway, he called at this point and he was like, "Oh, I've been having this dream, this vision, and you were in it." And we were back home in our hometown
And we were pushing a shopping trolley down the supermarket aisles, filling it up with everything. Crisps, pizza, everything
Lots
I'd
of
wanted
crisps,
for the last
apparently.
like 40 days and hadn't been able to get. So yeah, it wasn't really this big inspiring dream of getting to the South Pole. It was literally a dream about pushing a trolley through supermarket aisles and filling it with food. But the rest of the journey, the last few days, were when I started to see and hear more things. Now, I don't mean real things, I don't mean I saw real things or heard real things, but I started to imagine things. So I started to see people, characters from cartoons and things running around the snow, darting around the snow. I would see, when I would look down in the snow, pictures of animals in the snow, all sorts of strange things. The fields from when I was younger on the farm kind of appeared out of nowhere as well. And when I came back, I spoke to one of my friends who's a psychologist at Durham University, a professor of psychology, and he specialises in hallucination experiences. And he kind of said that quite often what he finds is that the mind creates what it thinks it needs at that point. So clearly at that point, my mind thought that I needed dinosaurs or animals, that sense of comfort perhaps in something else being there. But interestingly, something else that I'd heard was my name being called from behind me. So quite often I would hear in the wind my name being called. And every time I would hear it, I would think, well, there's no one here, so there's no point in me looking behind, but I would also just do it anyway, because if I didn't look behind and someone tapped me in the shoulder, then that would pretty much just be the scariest thing I could ever imagine. So yeah, just quite amazing what the mind can create when you really need it. And then eventually skiing over 70 miles the last 2 days, doubling or tripling some of my daily mileages from earlier in the trip, surviving on so little sleep, I was pretty much asleep standing up. Eventually, I saw the most amazing sight come into view.
And so while Luke was doing this at the South Pole, I was back home and social media just went absolutely wild. So I'd actually napped because I was so tired from staying up for Luke finishing his ski and getting to the South Pole. And I went for an afternoon nap and I woke up and I looked at my phone and Twitter was just, I had all these Twitter messages. It was like, what on earth is going on? And it was this tweet. So the Prime Minister at the time had tweeted at Luke, not knowing it was me probably behind Twitter, saying, congratulations on becoming the first Scot to complete an unsupported solo trek to the South Pole. Outstanding achievement. And of course, Twitter can be amazing and bring out the best in people, but it can also bring out the worst in people as well. And so someone had replied to the tweet saying, why don't you try it and hopefully never come back?
So really this expedition taught us so much about the power of exploration to not just help raise funds for amazing charities and raise awareness of the wonderful things and amazing things that they do, but also the power to bring people together behind this cause. And just getting the messages that I received from all around the world, from people overcoming their own health issues and wanting to kind of move past those, just made every challenge, every obstacle, everything that happened in the lead up to the trip and on the trip just so worthwhile.
And really, Antarctica gave us both the confidence in planning and executing complex and remote expeditions to different parts in the world. And so then we decided, okay, we're going to do some things together. We thought We're going to do some multi-day endurance events, some ultra running, and also we planned a couple of our own expeditions. So we attempted to become the first people to travel from South to North Alaska by human power. And also we were up in Arctic Norway skiing and filming with the indigenous people there and understanding about how climate change and solutions are affecting the people that live there. So that all kind of happened post-Alaska, but really last year in February 2020, I kind of had enough of being on expedition and doing things with Luke. Well, not really, but I wanted to have a taste at my own solo expedition, and really not just to give Luke a taste of his own medicine of what Antarctica was like, but really just to have a chance to build my own confidence, my own decision making, especially in a more polar environment where I would be on my own for several days camping and skiing and all that kind of stuff as well. And so I headed north to Hardangervidda, or the Hardanger Plateau, which is in southwest Norway, for a solo crossing of that.
So I'd been up to this part of the world before, up in Hardangervidda, when I was doing some training and some preparation for Antarctica. And it's such a special, beautiful part of the world. And the terrain is really mountainous, and I expected there to be some deep snow, but I had every confidence that Hazel would not just complete any challenge she set herself, but also just have an amazing time doing it.
And when you arrive into the town of Finse, so this is where I started my solo crossing of Hardangervidda. So the town of Finse, you could only get there by train. There's no roads, so I guess in winter it means you can also get there on skis, by snowmobile, by dog sled as well. In the summer you can walk in as well. But other than that, you're arriving on the train and it's like this winter wonderland, and you're stepping off almost like into this other world with the snow swirling, and it's just such an amazing place. I set off after 2 weeks of polar expedition training up there. So for 2 weeks I'd been training, skiing, camping with another group. So I ditched Luke and gone to another group. And then when I set off for my solo crossing, it was just me on my own. So I had my pulk completely packed with everything I needed to survive. Too much food, way too much food, but just to be sure that I had enough to get across. And it was almost this anticipation, that excitement that we always get just before an expedition. And then once you start, you kind of settle into your routines, into this kind of calm. And just that freedom, that simplicity of knowing that it was just me responsible for all the decision makings. Like I got to decide where me, myself and I were going to camp, and what time I would stop skiing at, and when I would stop for snacks, like all of this kind of stuff. It was just all on me now, and it just felt really freeing and kind of quite light as well. And the thing that I love, and that we both love so much about expeditions, is just having everything with you that you need to survive. And so life gets so simple. Everything is just stripped back. You have your food, you have water, which is all around you, you've got your stove that you can melt it, and you have your shelter, which is your tent. And that's really all you need. So long as you can stay safe in these environments, it can just keep going and keep going. And it's just such an amazing feeling knowing just how little we need to actually survive.
And back home, some of you might remember, February 2020 was really horrendous for weather, and it actually was the wettest February in UK history. And I struggled to get out for a run some days because of the rain, and that month 3 storms hit the UK, so it was pretty treacherous down here. And
really the 3 same storms that were coming across the Atlantic and hitting the west coast and hitting the UK were also battering the west coast of Norway, and so that was falling as snow on the Hardanger Plateau where I was skiing. And so, as you can see in this video, I would just open my tent in the morning. Well, first of all, it would be darker than normal, and I'd kind of tap the side of it, and then I would just see the snow slide off the edge of the tent. My heart would sink, and I would just know, okay, it's snowed a lot overnight. And then I'd open, have a look, see the wind, see the snow that had piled up, and I knew that it would take me extra time, not only after doing my routines, so boiling water, filling my bottles, having breakfast, packing everything up, but then I'd have to dig the tent out as well, dig my pulk out, dig everything out, and then drag this pulk through the deep snow, this pulk with all this ridiculous amount of food in it, through the deep snow as well. And, you know, the process of doing this was really slow, and I knew, you know, every single day, hours and days were being added onto my expedition. Every time I saw the InReach forecast, so the Garmin satellite device that I could get the weather forecast on at night, my heart would sink, because it's like, oh, there's more snow, heavy winds, heavy snow forecast. And then in the morning, just knowing that any hills would just take so much longer.
So with the roles reversed, this is what I saw back home. So these blue dots indicating Hazel's position on the route. So that was from Finse in the north to Hakuliseter in the south, a distance of about 130 kilometres, across mountainous terrain with the threat of avalanche, and of course this really super deep snow that was falling as rain in the UK.
And so, you know, day after day, I would wake up to this snow, and day after day, I knew that I would have, it's almost like hills for breakfast. It's like, had my breakfast, dig the tent out, okay, what's the next hill that I would need to be climbing? Because I'd camp at the bottom of these hills. And, you know, just knowing that it was going to take something that wouldn't have taken that long, had the snow been different, was going to take me now 4 or 5 hours to just get up. You know, I had the chance to just get really frustrated, especially day after day of snow, and knowing that, like, it was just days that was adding onto my expedition. But where I came back to in that moment was just thinking, how can I use this? So this like absolute ridiculousness of, you know, sometimes not even being able to move the pulk. I had to do everything I could, just put my ski poles in, like almost rock myself to like get the pulk to move forward through the snow, dragging it up the hills, zigzagging it, then the other direction, dragging it. I was like, okay, this is ridiculous, but how can I actually use this? And I thought, okay, well, I'm definitely going to be able to tell this story in a talk, and so here I am. So tick. Yeah, it's like, it was all worth it, because I now get to share this with you guys. So it's like, okay, maybe I can tell the story of it later. And also then thinking, okay, well, how else can I use this? I can use this as a chance for practicing presence. I can get frustrated, and I'm not going to get up the hill any quicker. It's not going to, you know, snow less. I'm not going to be able to ski faster from frustration. But if I practice presence, then I'm actually going to be able to enjoy this and not just try and bulldoze through these hills and get all worked up and flustered and annoyed with it. So it was this chance, this moment to really see what I was capable of, what my mind was capable of in just coming back to being present. And so I broke it down. I focused on 10 steps at a time. I was like, if I can do 10 steps, then I gave myself this mini like, yes, like mini like high five inside. So I'd count 10, and then I'd do another 10, and then when I got to 50, I'd pause, I'd have a rest, I'd like look around where I came from, and I'd just be like, yes, I've done 50. And I just broke it down like that. And it was almost, you know, we do this a lot with our clients now, like in the coaching sense, because our brains are hardwired to look for danger. They're always looking at the worst case and how far we have to go and how difficult things are. But bringing it back to actually how far we've come. And this is true in life as well as on a hill in deep snow in Hardangervidda, is how can we celebrate all of the wins? Every little bit of progress is worth celebrating. And you just get that little mini dopamine hit, that mini like, yes. And then, you know, 4 or 5 hours later, I'd be at the top of the hill, and I'd have done it 10 steps at a time. And really that's something that I've taken back into my own life now. But it really helped me get to the top of these hills when I could have just easily got frustrated or gone back in my tent and been like, look, I'm just staying here until it stops snowing. I'm just going to eat all this food I've got. And really, you know, once I actually just kept doing this and got to the top, that feeling was just incredible. And looking out, like you can see in this picture, just like looking out, your eye level with the other mountains, looking out over the plateau and just seeing that zigzag deep cut path where I'd come up in the snow is just amazing, an amazing, amazing feeling. You know, after practicing the presence about the hills, breaking it down, celebrating the wins, and each morning trying not to get frustrated with the heavy falling snow, after days and days of waking up, just snow, finally I woke up, poked my head outside the tent, and there had been no new snow that had fallen, and it was just the most amazing experience. It's like when you've gone through something that seems so hard and you've had to use everything to get through it, then having something just not be there anymore, it just feels like the best feeling in the world. It was the best feeling in the world. Eventually, battling through all the snow, I crossed Hardangervidda solo. It took me just under 12 days, which was several days more than I'd planned. And I'd had no phone reception during the time, so I just had the odd bit of communication with Luke on the satellite phone. And then I kind of came out and came back into a very global, different situation. This was February 2020 last year.
And so from spending a month apart,
Yeah.
Hazel came back and it was lockdown, so we spent all the time together, and so luckily we do get on pretty well generally.
Yeah, literally.
And really reflecting back, choosing to put ourselves in these situations that feel really difficult on expeditions actually teaches us so much about ourselves, and this is something we've taken into our everyday lives.
And as well as understanding more about ourselves, it's being in these places, in this magnificent presence of nature, and just being in these places that we're in complete awe and just humbled by wilderness and by the natural world. And I think on expedition, when everything is stripped back to the bare necessities, so food, water, shelter, you have everything with you need to survive, that's when you realize what's truly important and how important it is to connect not only with the natural world, but really kind of connect with ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you.